Victoria's diamond wedding ring caught the chandelier light as she pointed it directly at my face, her voice dripping with practiced cruelty. "Look, everyone, our little Emma is 35 and still single. When are you going to stop pretending you're happy alone?" The turkey went cold on my plate as every relative turned to stare. My hands trembled around the crystal wine glass. "Actually, Victoria," I said, setting down the glass with deliberate calm, "there's something you should know." The woman who had spent years apologizing for her existence was about to disappear forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy true and exciting stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Write in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Now, let's get to the beginning of this story. The Whitmore family Thanksgiving had always been held at Victoria's Greenwich estate, where nothing was left to chance and everything existed to showcase her success. Imported marble floors reflected the glow of Italian crystal, while fresh white orchids from her personal greenhouse adorned every surface. The dining room could seat 20, though we were only 12 this year, the empty chairs making our small family feel even more fractured. Victoria moved through her domain like a queen, adjusting place cards, straightening already perfect napkins, ensuring her world remained flawless. She'd married well at 23, Marcus Rothwell, old money, older morals, and a trust fund that made her opinions seem weightier to our relatives. Every year, she'd greet me with the same pitying smile, the same questions about my career, my apartment, my perpetual singleness. Our parents had passed 5 years ago, leaving Victoria to assume the role of family matriarch, a position she wielded with surgical precision. The house smelled of expensive candles and her signature white tea perfume, but underneath there was something else, the faint scent of desperation that money couldn't quite mask. The first cracks appeared during cocktail hour, subtle as hairline fractures in her perfect facade. Victoria's comments came disguised as concern, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Emma, darling, you look tired. Are you getting enough sleep in that tiny apartment?" She'd pause for effect, letting the word tiny hang in the air like smoke. "And are you still doing that little writing thing? How quaint." Aunt Margaret nodded sympathetically, while Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably, both trained by years of Victoria's manipulation to follow her lead. I'd started bringing a notebook years ago, claiming to jot down family stories, but really documenting these moments. The microaggressions, the calculated slights, the way she'd touch my shoulder with false tenderness before delivering another blow. Marcus would watch from across the room, whiskey in hand, his silence somehow more damning than participation. When I'd try to mention my work, the articles, the modest successes, Victoria would redirect the conversation to her charity galas, her renovations, her importance in their social circle. The evening light streamed through her floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. This year felt different from the moment I arrived. Electricity crackling beneath the surface of forced pleasantries. Victoria's attacks were more frequent, her smile sharper, as if she sensed something shifting and needed to reassert control. During dinner, she regaled the table with stories of her latest social triumphs, the mayor attending her fundraiser, the senator's wife requesting her advice, the society page featuring her penthouse renovation. Each story was punctuated with glances in my direction, reminders of what I supposedly lacked. "Of course, not everyone can understand the pressure of maintaining social standing," she'd say, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. The chandelier's light seemed too bright, casting harsh shadows that made everyone's faces look hollow. My cousin David tried to change the subject to football, but Victoria steamrolled over him, her need for dominance palpable. The air grew thick with tension, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath, the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time with increasingly ominous ticks. When she leaned forward to refill her wine glass, I caught something in her eyes, not just cruelty, but fear. Then came the moment that changed everything, swift and brutal as a blade between ribs. Victoria stood up during dessert, champagne flute in hand, commanding attention with practiced authority. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for public humiliation. The table fell silent, silver forks suspended over untouched pumpkin pie. "To family," she began, but her eyes found mine immediately. "To those of us who've built something meaningful, who've created legacy and continuity." Her pause was theatrical, calculated for maximum impact. "And to those still, finding their way." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Uncle Robert coughed. Cousin Sarah studied her napkin. Marcus refilled his glass without looking up. "After all," Victoria continued, her smile growing wider, "we can't all marry well or achieve traditional success. Some of us are destined to remain observers." The chandelier light caught her teeth, making her smile look predatory. That's when something inside me finally broke, not shattered, but crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. I set down my dessert fork with deliberate calm, the small clink echoing louder than it should have in the sudden silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice came out steady, almost conversational. "Victoria, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." Every face turned toward me, curiosity replacing the awkward tension. Victoria's triumphant expression flickered, sensing the shift, but not understanding it yet. "You know that little writing thing I do?" I let the question hang in the air, watching her confidence waver. "Well, last month I signed a 7-figure book deal with Meridian Publishing." The silence that followed was absolute, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Victoria's champagne flute trembled in her hand, a tiny earthquake revealing the fault lines in her composure. "And the apartment you find so tiny? I bought the entire building last spring." Marcus's head snapped up, his whiskey forgotten. Aunt Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. The woman who had apologized for existing was gone, replaced by someone who had been quietly building an empire while Victoria performed her superiority. The aftermath unfolded like a car accident in slow motion, beautiful and terrible in its inevitability. Victoria's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally pure rage, each emotion naked and raw, without her usual careful control. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. I reached into my purse and placed a crisp legal document on her pristine tablecloth, the publishing contract, still smelling of expensive paper and fresh ink. Marcus leaned forward to read over her shoulder, his eyebrows disappearing into his hairline. 7 figures, he murmured, and for the first time in years, I heard actual respect in someone's voice. Victoria's hands shook as she picked up the contract, her manicured nails leaving small crescent marks in the paper. "But how? When?" she stammered, her usual eloquence deserting her. The power dynamic shifted so suddenly it was almost audible, like a massive tree falling in a forest. Around the table, our relatives began to reassess everything they thought they knew, their expressions ranging from amazement to embarrassment for their years of complicit silence. The grandfather clock chimed 9, its sound no longer ominous but celebratory. That night, alone in my apartment, my building, I made the call that would change everything. My editor, Sarah Chen, picked up on the second ring despite the late hour. "Emma, how was the family dinner from hell?" Her voice was warm with familiar understanding. She'd heard my Victoria stories before. "Better than expected," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. My sister and her husband, they're the subjects of that investigative piece I mentioned." The silence on the other end was thoughtful, professional. "The hedge fund scandal, the charity fraud connections?" "The very same," I confirmed, watching the city lights twinkle below my windows like fallen stars. "I have documents, bank statements, email exchanges. everything we need to expose how Marcus has been using Victoria's charitable foundation to launder money from his investment schemes. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp with excitement and ethical consideration. Emma, you know this will destroy your relationship with your family permanently. I thought of Victoria's face, twisted with years of carefully cultivated cruelty, and felt something that might have been grief or might have been relief. Some relationships are already destroyed, I told her. They just haven't figured it out yet. The investigation took 3 weeks, every day bringing new revelations that painted Marcus and Victoria's empire in increasingly darker shades. Sarah's team worked with forensic accountants, following digital breadcrumbs through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. The Rothwell Foundation, Victoria's pride and joy, had been funneling donations meant for children's charities into Marcus's failing investment schemes. The mayor she'd bragged about knowing, he'd received illegal campaign contributions disguised as charitable donations. The senator's wife paid for silence about a sexual harassment scandal that would have ended Marcus's career years ago. I provided the missing pieces, access codes I'd memorized from Victoria's computer, family conversations where she'd inadvertently revealed crucial details, photographs from family gatherings that showed key players together at incriminating times. Each piece of evidence felt like removing stones from a dam, pressure building toward an inevitable flood. At night, I'd sit in my apartment, my building, watching Victoria's house through my telescope, seeing lights burning late as Marcus took increasingly frantic phone calls. The empire he'd built on other people's trust was crumbling, and he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, even if he couldn't yet see the cracks. The morning the story broke, I was having coffee in my favorite cafe when my phone began buzzing with notifications. Rothwell Foundation scandal. Charity funds used in massive money laundering scheme dominated the front page of 3 major newspapers. My article, published simultaneously in The Atlantic and featured on the magazine's website, detailed 5 years of financial crimes that read like a thriller novel. Within hours, federal agents were at Victoria's door with search warrants. The society pages that had once celebrated her fundraising galas now featured photos of boxes being carried from her home, her charity's offices sealed with crime scene tape. Marcus was arrested at his club, led away in handcuffs while his golf partners watched in stunned silence. The same reporters who had once covered Victoria's events now camped outside her house, shouting questions about stolen donations and money laundering. Her phone calls went unanswered as former friends distanced themselves with the speed of people fleeing a plague ship. The mayor she'd bragged about knowing issued a statement condemning her actions and promising full cooperation with federal investigators. Victoria's carefully constructed world didn't just collapse, it imploded, taking down everyone who'd profited from her husband's crimes. 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment, the penthouse I'd bought in the same building where Victoria had once mocked my tiny space. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt more like poetry than revenge. The city spread below me like a circuit board of lights and possibilities. No longer the view of someone looking up, but someone who had claimed her proper place. Victoria was serving 2 years in minimum security for her role as an accessory to Marcus's crimes, her fortune seized to compensate his victims. The house in Greenwich sat empty, a for sale sign weathering in the autumn rain. My book was climbing the bestseller lists. The story of a family's corruption and one woman's journey from victim to victor resonating with readers worldwide. Today was Thanksgiving again, but this year I was hosting, not in my building, but in the mansion I'd purchased in the Hamptons, where Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret and Cousin David gathered not out of obligation, but genuine affection. The dining room filled with laughter instead of tension, warmth instead of calculated cruelty. As I carried the turkey to the table, carved and perfect, I realized I was finally completely free. For the first time in my life, I was grateful for everything I had, not because it was more than someone else's, but because it was truly, purely mine. And you? What do you think? Did she do the right thing? What would you have done in her place? If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us what you thought in the comments. Your support is what helps us continue bringing you exciting stories like this one. Now watch other stories on screen. We'll see you next time, with love and respect.